Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.
Stoveleg Media, igniting conversation.
Hello and welcome to another bonus episode of True Crime Cast. I'm Jamie here, and I'm thrilled to be joined by Anna Sonoda, licensed clinical social worker and author. Anna, thanks so much for hanging out with me today.
Thank you, Jamie. I'm so excited to be here.
Anna's been on the show before. We met at CrimeCon in Colorado last year and continued to keep up with her work and just love what she does. So excited to talk to her about some things that have been happening and will be happening. A little bit more about Anna. She is a social worker that's worked with offender treatment, community mental health, trauma recovery, domestic violence intervention, and anger management, and has become just a major voice in speaking out against grooming and an advocate for legislation to address that. Her publishings include Duck, Duck, Groom, Understanding How a Child Becomes a Target, Duck, Duck, Groom, a guided journal for adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse, and most recently, the award-winning children's book, Wait, That's Weird, which is a parent-child guide. So we're going to get into all of that, among other things. And your intro grows every time we chat, which is awesome.
Well, Jamie, I'm so delighted to be here. This topic doesn't go away, even though I'm working my way to try to get that to be the truth.
But it's becoming more and more part of the conversation, which I think is one of your primary goals of talking about this topic. And last time we did go over Duck, Duck, Groom and kind of some of the principles and things to watch for in there. I'll be honest with you, it's been on my mind as a parent and as a volunteer in the community since then. Just, I don't know, looking for things, as you talked about patterns instead of single instances and all that. But more recently in Kentucky, it's been a really big part of our conversation. We passed a new bill about grooming last month.
Yeah, and this is incredible. This is the power of legislation, Jamie. Everybody listening to this episode needs to know that a law was passed in the state of Kentucky, and merely days later, they had their first charge to a woman by the name of Sadie Flores, being charged with an inappropriate relationship with a student. I believe it's the Graves County School District.
Yeah.
Which is the law at work.
Yeah, and so quickly. This was House Bill 4, and basically, if I'm understanding it correctly, it makes grooming a minor a misdemeanor that can be up to a year in jail, but if they're under 12, it's a felony. But it does put something on the books so we can say that what you're doing is a crime, whereas before, it was a little more murky. Am I getting the gist of that right?
That's such an important distinction. So many times before, events would happen, but nobody knew where to take it.
Yeah.
It's not illegal to buy something for a child. It's not illegal to text a child. But when you put it all together and you have legislation protecting children, this is the law at work. It's fantastic.
What does the national landscape look like in accordance to these laws? I tried to look some of it up for myself, and not all the publications are up to date, but it seems like there's a lot on the books for luring, or I think that word came up a lot in the things that I looked at, but not grooming specifically. The last number I saw on a website that looked the most updated said there were as many as 20 states with something on the books. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, it's closer to about 18.
Okay.
But there is a rumbling going across this country. And if you're interested, I would encourage you to follow Michelle Peterson. Her family is actually the original family where all of this grooming legislation began. Her son's case was the first conviction of grooming in the United States. And it has been the foundation of many subsequent charges and prosecutions across the country. And she has a wealth of knowledge and experience, and she continues to work with various states arguing for exactly this: grooming legislation, breaking down the process so that agencies and school districts have an ability to show action rather than just waiting for abuse.
What do you think it's taken in these states that are taking action? What has been the impetus that maybe some of the other states haven't had yet, or are they just lagging behind?
I have been so impressed at the leadership. I think this local leadership, the state legislators who are listening to their constituents, recognizing that just like you and I are talking about grooming, many households across this country are concerned and are worried, and they are pushing their legislators to push this agenda forward in order to protect their kids and protect adults who work in youth serving environments.
And I've thought about, like I said, I've thought about that from both angles. I do have 4 children, but also I volunteer a lot. So I have found myself in the back of my head thinking, I can send this text, but is that weird? Would that be pursued as weird? And weird is the word that kept coming up in my head because I think last time we chatted, you were working on Wait, That's Weird, which is aimed at parents and kids talking about this together. What do you think is important about we can talk about the content in a second, but about having that piece that is not just for parents. This is for kids and parents to talk about together and read together.
Yeah, today's children are smart and equipped and capable. And too often we are sending a message about your body belongs to you. You can say no. But grooming is a little bit different than that.
Mhm.
Grooming convinces a child to do things that are supported by this adult or this older teen. And it's based through this attachment that grooming builds over time. And so it's not as easy just to say no or keep your body covered because it's sort of like boiling a frog. You don't start with hot water.
Right.
You start with cold water, and grooming always starts off sweet. So, Wait, That's Weird was really grown out of this concept that Duck Duck is for adults and it's for people who work in youth serving environments who want to understand prevention 101. But I recognized that there was a gap in the resources we provide families and children. And that's where Wait, That's Weird comes in because we don't necessarily need to solve the case or lock somebody up, but just the power of waiting, the power of calling something into question and hesitating or bringing a parent in or adding someone else in or adding an extra person on a text or adding a person in the room has the power to change the outcome. And that's what I wanted to educate not only parents, but also children.
And I think one gap that we've had is just a lack of a way to talk about it. Because when I was growing up, it was stranger danger. It was look at behind every bush. Sometime between then and now, we've realized that most assaults are by somebody you know, but we still haven't made that last leap to how do we talk about the slow process of how that happens. And you're not inventing language or terminology here. You're taking the words that we would use to describe that and adding meaning to it, which I absolutely love. So what is le- if a parent and a child are reading this together, what could a child do that they would learn from this book to help to protect themselves or to prevent themselves from getting in a grooming situation?
Point of this book is to teach kids to notice
Right.
because it's in noticing that you can tell somebody else. If we solely focus our message on just say no, then we've actually handcuffed kids in a way that is not productive. What I want to do is I want to build a skill set, not only in the child, but also between the parent and the child to have this reciprocal understanding that I'm going to notice things as a parent and you're going to notice things as a kid. And I can't be with you 24/7. But when we have a tool like Wait, That's Weird, so that we can come together and say, has anything happened that was weird at school today? Was anything weird at camp? I noticed this thing that stood out to me during practice. That felt weird to me as a parent. What did that feel like for you as one of the players on the team? Beginning to teach and train dialogue, open dialogue and communication. I haven't articulated that some person is bad or that some situation is a punitive situation, but I've simply created a little bit of space, kind of blown a balloon towards having air in the conversation between parents and kids.
You talk about for years it's been just rely on your instinct. See how this if you feel like this is not okay, then do something. But I think the messaging coming out about grooming now is that that's not enough. It's about being aware and having those conversations. So why is instinct? Why does that fail us so often in situations that can involve like you said, an adult or an older teen that maybe has some ill intentions?
Yeah, trust your gut is a wonderful resource. And it is great at recognizing intense, obvious danger. So when I have a child who's running towards the street, I'm going to trust my gut and intervene. But grooming bypasses our gut. I would equate it to something like your smoke detector in your house versus your carbon monoxide detector.
Okay.
Trust your gut is like your smoke detector. So it's looking for smoke, fire, heat. But carbon monoxide is odorless, it is clear, and it can incrementally build without people noticing. So what I'm attempting to do is build in everybody's carbon monoxide detector because we already have our smoke detector, but that's not quite enough.
Yeah, you talk about that as gases that fill our home, but I don't know if that's a direct correlation or why you also have developed the gas model of discussing this, but that is something that I see at the top of your profile on LinkedIn and those things. What's the gas model for recognizing
this is
grooming?
our shorthand.
Okay.
Gas is what fuels predation. So gas stands for grooming, access, and space. And all three are the ingredients that predators rely on in order to abuse and manipulate kids. So what I wanted to do through this gas model is help educate people that you don't necessarily need to know exactly what's going on. But if you can remove grooming or access or space, then you are well on your way to interrupting the abusive predation process.
Could you define the difference between access and space to me, that it's more than just location? How are those two different?
That's a great question. So access can be earned through a title or a role. So if I am the youth director at a local church, then I will have access to the youth. Nobody will question that I'm spending time around kids. If I have space, then I have something like a venue where I can meet children or I can meet youth. Or if I have access, I am thinking about the different hats that I wear as a person. So as a family member, access might grant me the opportunity to go over to a family member's house in a way that if I'm a stranger or if I'm the mailman, I'm not necessarily coming into the house. So when we think about our access, we need to be thinking in terms of typically the people that we are working with or who are working with our kids are given access through the form of things like transportation or time together or different venues in which they are simply entitled to that access. Does that make sense?
It does, and I just think about my weekly schedule. I feel like everybody's so busy now that the time spent piece with other people that are not your parents is I don't know if it's more than it used to be, but it certainly feels like it. So I think that time spent is what I visibly would notice the most as far as the access, because we're not talking about things happening necessarily that are shady in locker rooms that are behind the build. These are things happening at practice, at track, at while you're standing around in mingling. Like, these are things that are happening, but that time is the access. So that was very helpful.
And one thing I would just add is that the grooming process builds influence and trust. Access builds time, and space builds isolation and often accelerates the exploitation process.
And I do think that's the part that we would talk about more with kids and even volunteers. I know in some of my volunteer roles, it's you're not to be in a room alone with one of our teenagers, and that's great, but that doesn't prevent me from the other conversations I'm having. That doesn't prevent people. I shouldn't say me. That makes me sound terrible. Doesn't prevent people from using the other time they have as the access point to create a new space somewhere down the line.
That's a great point. And I also think it should be mentioned that we're discussing space. And I want us to remember that in 2026, that also means digital space.
Right. Which is so scary, so scary. And as fast as things are changing, I wonder for work like yours, for books like the ones you've written, are we going to have to get a new edition every few years to talk about what AI is doing now or what we're able to do? It's like, when you're in your hologram form, you really need to be observing for these things. So I'm glad you're doing the writing about this and I'm not. And one thing that I don't know, something that an angle I hadn't taken about this before is that when we're talking about these issues, I can see that was a weird text. This is a weird conversation to have. That's odd, all those things, but it's not about an incident. Grooming is a pattern, and it's recognizing those patterns that I think, I never would have thought about before. Of course, repetitive, creepy behavior is going to raise a flag, but repetitive behaviors that don't look like one another may be the pattern piece is something that I wouldn't know how to look for and wouldn't know to look for without having these conversations. I don't know if there was a question in there. I'm just spitballing things that that your work is bringing up for me.
Well, I appreciate it, Jamie, because I also think it's easier as a parent myself. I may not be there for the one event or the one incident, but I'm looking for a trend. The trend is what matters. The pattern is what matters, because predators are going to go out of their way to try to be as isolated as they can with either a group of kids or an identified kid. And that's something that as a parent, I can recognize. And then I can also teach my kids, look, it might feel good to be chosen. It might feel good to be special by a teacher or a coach or fill in the blank person. But I need to know about that. And you can recognize what flattery feels like and what favoritism feels like. And when that person eventually says, oh, you don't need to worry about that rule, I got it covered. Don't worry about that. When you're with me, you can do this.
Right.
That's an indicator that you got to tell me and speak up.
Right. Yeah. Obviously, the importance of these conversations with our kids can't be overstated. But looking at it from the other side, if you were developing policies or procedures for a youth organization, let's say you were over a local youth club, I don't know, a 4-H club of kids just get together, or I live out in the country, so I say 4-H, or a church youth group or a team, what policies would you put in place that you feel like your research would support in keeping the children safe from grooming, but also putting the adults in a position where A, if they have bad intentions, they can't do it, but B, they also are clear of suspicion if they don't have those intentions, because that's a concern as well.
I love this question. Yes. So I think policies really get into the weeds when they have opaque language. The difference between adults will not have an inappropriate relationship with minors versus adults will not message children on personal devices or phones outside of the approved messaging along with one other adult. That's much easier to follow policy number 2 than follow policy number 1.
Right.
What is an inappropriate relationship? Is communication that happens outside of the bounds of the event inappropriate? So I think if I were dealing with the bare basics for an agency, I would focus in on being able to answer 4 categories. Is it observable? Is it questionable? Is it accountable? And is it interruptible? And really, when you think about that, those are not very hard questions. What we want out of every interaction with the kids is for there to be a structure, for us to know, why are we meeting? Why do you need to have this meeting with the kids? And if there is a structure and if there's a purpose to the meeting, then those meetings should be held in a place where it's observable, it's interruptible. Other people can pass by the door or they can walk in the room. These things shouldn't be isolated. And so, in the same way that we talk in the gas model about the space, I would expect any agency who's hosting children and youth to promote that transparency in the physical spaces and their online spaces, whether through the email communication or individual device discussions. I worked with an agency once who had a rule about not being able to transport children alone in the car.
Mhm.
That is very simple.
Mhm.
And what clear policies actually do is that they make it easier for people like you and people like me to be able to report an actual behavior.
Let's say we do see a behavior or a pattern and we think there may be an issue here. Is there a what's the reporting and I'm sure it's different everywhere you are, but is this, let's go straight to the police, let's go to a leader of this organization? Because like you mentioned earlier, there's a time when you're ready to say this person I think is doing something, but there are other times when I just want to say it's weird. Who can I tell that to?
I think first and foremost, saying it aloud in front of leadership is important. And if you're thinking that way, Jamie, I would put money on the fact that other people
Mhm.
have also thought it was weird. And sometimes what we do is we get into our adult mind and we think about all the reasons why we shouldn't say something. But it's easy enough at a staff meeting or at a venue in which you have more than one adult who's in a supervisory role or a leadership role to be able to say, I'm confused about something. I thought we had a policy about kids not riding alone in our cars. Can we just go back over that? Because it seems like we've become really lax on coaches driving kids back to the campus after games.
Yeah, I think those conversations are crucial and aren't happening as much as they should. And I obviously we talk to you. We're very interested in your work, so this is something that John and I talk about often. And just looking at the true crime landscape, my goodness, we're always talking about horrific things that happen after the fact. It's it's a lot of what we do. So for our audience, for true crime folks, what could they take away from a conversation like this and from your work that maybe general parenting podcasts or infomercials wouldn't cover?
I think we've already covered a tremendous amount about how possible predation is in every environment. Nobody gets to claim predators. So they're everywhere, but they're not everyone. And the true crime audience is keen to learn. They're so curious. They're hungry for more. And what we need to avoid is using crimes, especially crimes against children, as an opportunity to languish there. Instead, we need to see what can we learn? What potential skills or detectors or signs were there that other people missed that can prevent this from happening in a neighborhood down the street or a state across the way.
Yeah, I think that's great. When I'm consuming crime, I in my head I'm trying to solve murders and prevent mass destruction. But I think it's crimes like these, which honestly, I mean, as you know, most of the stories that we tell where there's an individual victim, grooming is somewhere in there at some point for a lot of these stories, but that's not the thing that we're looking at. That's not the thing that, yes, we're very curious. We're more interested sometimes in the psychology of the killer or the opportunities they made for themselves. So, no, I think that's fantastic to be able to increase our awareness and our understanding that we're not always looking for those things. So, yeah, the crime folks I think can make a big impact here. Also, a great group of advocates for legislative pieces. We talk to all kinds of people who are doing that kind of work, and I think getting those voices on board could be big for the movement in general.
I agree. And I also think that what true crime has the potential to teach us is that there is a long runway before abuse can take off. And if only we educated people properly about grooming awareness, because that happens in over 99% of cases. When you interview survivors and you look at the statistics, 99% of child sexual abuse survivors say they experienced at least one grooming behavior. So why are we not being very basic and very clear with all families, with all parents, with all adults who work in youth environments to educate them in a clear way? We have done a very inefficient job up to this point of using very weird words. We're not using clear words. We're not relating to the parents who are actually on the front lines of doing this work. And one of my objectives is to cut through the noise and let people know what they can do, not just stay fixated in the fear and the worry, because that's not solving anything.
Right. Is as we in crime do continue to live in that space and not necessarily resonate in it, but we stay there. Are there things you think we promote that may set back some of these efforts that maybe the tone, and I realize that there are 700 million crime creators out there and they all do it a little bit differently, but I think generally we're moving toward a more compassionate space of true crime. Is there any of that though that is self-defeating for the grooming cause, for lack of a better way to put it?
I would say the first thing that comes to mind is that true crime is very good at labeling the offender, the predator, as evil.
Yeah.
We can really get behind that.
We love a
We can
villain.
sink our teeth into a villain. And the truth is actually a lot more complicated. Predators work to be charming and beloved and liked and helpful and generous. So it's not as easy as saying this big villain of a predator attacked children. Actually, it's a lot more dynamic because that person has actually built a connection with the child, albeit on the basis of something that is fraudulent.
Right.
But to the child and to the adults and to the surrounding adults, they often get convinced that this person is caring, even loving.
hmm Yeah, that certainly should give us pause on the way that we talk about folks and describe these situations, because it's not always the scary person, like you said. It's sometimes the profile we like to give is this criminal was abused in these ways, tortured dogs and set things on fire, when in reality, the people that you're talking about are often coached for 20 years without incident or publicly known incident rather. Family at home, like it seems like that's how the trust is built, right? Some of it's reputation. And that's
Absolutely.
not sexy to talk about in crime stories, unfortunately.
And I think on the survivor side, on the victim side, we often we sort of cut them off at the knees.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is that we sort of categorize them as unknowing.
Mm-hmm.
And what I would like to offer is that speaking out after experiencing grooming often runs into some barriers because of 3 reasons. Attachment, which we've talked about a little bit, this idea that the person chooses me, that I'm special to them,
Right.
that they let me do things that my parents wouldn't let me do, or my church wouldn't let me do, or my community wouldn't let me do. The next is ambiguity. Was that wrong? This person says they love me. I see my parents kissing. This person was kissing me because they love me. They said they love me.
Yeah.
So that ambiguity is very, very important. And the last one is aftermath. The impact of speaking up and saying something is remarkable. It could mean that a family member gets arrested and incarcerated. It could mean that you lose your relationship with your primary parent. It could mean that you lose the only person who has shown you this fraudulent care and love. And we cannot underestimate that. We cannot simply say, oh, well, the survivor in this case stayed quiet. Think about, from a child's perspective, the attachment, the ambiguity, and the aftermath. Many adults don't speak up because of those 3 reasons.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I love the work that you're doing because it's scary. It's scary because we don't talk about it enough. I know if I see certain things happening on the news, like some things are expected. I know some boogeymen are out there, but this is more concerning to me because the boogeyman looks like a soccer dad or a soccer mom. So it's I think about your work often, and I know we can get it everywhere a little bit. You have your books. I know they're available everywhere. Also, I think above your head there, I see words that are not in English. So Wait, That's Weird is available in Spanish as well. Is that right?
Yes, it was very important to me to make this available to the Hispanic population. There are so many Spanish-speaking families in this country that are struggling with these issues, and the language barrier is too great. And we must do everything we can with the resources that we provide for families to make sure that language is not a fence for prevention, and that we make it easy to raise families in this country who had this awareness and this knowledge. So that was one very, very important component for me when I was working on this project.
Love that. We'll have links to both of those, all of your works in the notes of this show, as well as a link to your podcast. Shortly after we talked to you last October, shortly after that, you started the Known and Trusted podcast, where you have guests at times. Sometimes you cover topics. You noted Michelle Peterson on earlier in this episode. She's on the second episode, so you bring people in that are living these issues to talk about what they've really seen and talk a little bit more about the podcast and when more episodes are coming.
Yeah, it was something that I started because I recognized that, like you said, we don't talk about grooming enough. And we talk very well about child sex abuse cases, but I'm so interested in this long runway and trying to empower parents and people on the front lines to recognize what that looks like. So I started probably 7 months ago, and I'm on season 2, which is very exciting.
Awesome.
I'm learning as I go, and if anybody has any topic ideas, I'm open, and you're more than welcome to come on. I would love to have you.
That would be great.
And the real goal of it is to turn hindsight into foresight and to use what we know, whether through interviews or survivor testimonies or solo episodes, to wrestle with this subject in a way that doesn't feel like you have to do it at a staff meeting or you have to do it at a family gathering.
Or at a fun required training, get told to go do things, or even interviews like this. There's in a lot of ways, you are bound to the questions that you're asked in interviews a lot of the time. So I love that this gives you a place to say things that other people may not ask about, because I'm sure a lot of people are asking the same things. So I love this is a venue for your work, and I encourage everybody to go subscribe to that. There was almost a whole year's worth of episodes already, and more will be coming on the way. You also do a lot of public speaking, and for our audience, you're going to be at another crime event soon. Would you like to talk about that a little bit?
Yes, I'm delighted to be joining CrimeCon UK as one of the keynote presenters, talking about the architecture of this betrayal that is grooming. And I know that it will be really enriching for myself and the audience to engage again in this very difficult subject. But as we know, this is not something that only happens in the United States. This is happening everywhere. So if we can teach this concept of a pattern, the gas model, we can spread this awareness no matter where children and parents are living.
I love that. I know a lot of our listeners in the UK will be attending. I know a lot of our listeners in America that are going, and honestly, I'm getting a little bit FOMO. I wish I was going to CrimeCon UK. It's in October. Is that correct? Second week of October?
Yes, October 3rd and 4th.
Oh,
It's going to be fantastic. I really encourage anybody who's there to come by and say hi, and we'll have to send you some pictures, Jamie, of how it all goes down.
Yeah, I want to see all the pictures of happy people while I'm stuck here in the States. I'm kidding. All right. Well, where can people find you online? I know your website is fantastic for linking to all the things you do with keeping up with your schedule. What about social media? Where can our listeners find you there?
I really mainly do Instagram at Anna Sonoda, LCSW. And I also have a Substack under my same name where I post articles and different notes and things, as well as the podcast episode.
Yeah, between your books, which are obviously books are long form, you've got a children's book, you've got a podcast, and then I was on the Substack earlier today. There are bite-sized doses of some of these things in there that I think is your things that you can get to really quickly and points you can make very quickly. So I love the variety of content you're putting out. As a parent and a volunteer, I think these are things that I need to be thinking and talking about. So anytime we bring you on, I love that our listeners get to hear you, but mostly I just have questions for myself. So I appreciate your patience in answering those.
Well, thank you, Jamie. It's always so nice to be with you and with your audience. And these dynamic questions are not like every other interview. So you kept me on my toes today. And I love that we're talking about this subject and that it's moving the needle.
Yep.
In Kentucky, they moved the needle with legislation. And even this small conversation, someone will listen to this and it will change one condition that they have in their home or that they have in the venue where they're working with kids or spending time with kids. And that's how we're going to move to positive change and prevent predation.
Absolutely love that, Anna. Thank you so much for your time and hanging out with us. Hopefully we'll get to come on your show at some other point. But now we just want to say thanks. It was great talking to you.
It was so good to be with you, Jamie. Thank you so much.
You've listened to True Crimecast, distributed by Stoveleg Media. Check out stoveleg.com to find out more about your hosts and to find other podcasts to listen to. Stoveleg Media, igniting conversation.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.